Holy smokes, my midlife mavens. If you've ever experienced brain fog, you will recognize it in this episode of the Midlife by Design pod. But hey, I'm keeping it real and sharing this interview because while I maybe wasn't at my best this day, our guest, Laura Valvasori, has an incredible story to share. Laura is a 6'2" emotional manifesting generator and has the life to show for it. We get into her experience going from burnt out corporate life to entrepreneurship and all the twists and turns that the entrepreneurial path has taken her on. We talk about intuition, the power of human design, and how going alcohol-free may very well help those gnarly perimenopause symptoms. I also want to name the fact that I still have a side gig with Scout and Cellar, a clean crafted wine company. And in this episode, Laura and I talk a lot about going alcohol-free. And I myself don't drink much, but I think it's important to just name that for me. I've been able to drink infrequently as long as I pay attention to what I'm drinking. Laura's dive into the alcohol-free lifestyle gave her amazing results, and it's worth serious consideration if you're struggling with perimenopause symptoms and drinking is a regular part of your life. I also want to encourage you to listen for how Laura uses her intuition for all of her decisions. She is such a great example of how to do it. I'm your host, Lori Lisai, human design teacher and midlife coach, here to help you use human design to shed others' expectations and be who you came here to be. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to Midlife by Design. Today I have a special guest. This is Laura Valvasori that we have with us today, who is a 6'2" manifesting generator. And I can't wait to dive into all kinds of things related to midlife and transitions and transformations. Laura has some great stories to share. So without further ado, welcome, Laura. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here talking about this because human design was a really important part of my journey in helping me understand myself and navigate some areas of my life. So I'm really happy to share this with people to give them a view of what it looks like in life. So sort of professionally, I'll say, first of all, my family, I'm a mom of two kids, two teens, 17 and 19. I live in Oakville, Ontario. And professionally, I have had a business, a consulting business, a marketing strategy and consulting business for the past 11 years. And that's sort of been my focus on the business side. And then while I was doing that, I started becoming inspired to write a book, which I felt always was in me, but never knew what it was about. And during the pandemic, when a lot of people were thinking about what they wanted their future to look like and not go back to corporate, I saw an opportunity to share some of what I learned about making the transition from being an employee to an entrepreneur and how you have to shift your mindset and the way you operate to be successful. So I launched that book in September of 2022. And then 2023 proved to be a very challenging year. My dad was diagnosed with lung cancer in January 2023. And I spent the next 6 months caring for him. I let go of all of my clients. I pulled back from my business in order to focus my time on my family that needed me in many different ways. And during that time, I was called to explore some more energy healing modalities as a way to support myself and those around me. So I did my Reiki level 1 and 2, and then I was drawn to something called the Emotion Code and ended up being certified in that because it was so helpful for me. And my dad, unfortunately, passed away in July of 2023. And I took some time to process that. And when I started to sort of come back into the world, a lot of people were asking me about my journey to going alcohol-free because they were curious. And so as a manifesting generator, it was something that was calling me, and I was responding to something that people were asking about. And I passionately, quickly built a program called Still Me, But Alcohol Free to support women who were interested in making that change. And that really came about I've also done a lot of mindset work over the last 5 years, and my intuition has become heightened. So I'm better at understanding when there's nudges and to follow those nudges. So I released that program, and more recently have been starting to have some experiences that have helped me to understand that I have mediumship abilities as well, which I think is all connected to the energy work. And I'm now following that, the breadcrumbs on that path, and opening up to that to see where it leads. So as you can hear, I have a very varied past and kind of history of following the things that are lighting me up and being able to bring them into the world kind of quickly and sharing my passion for those things.
Oh my gosh. This is just the perfect, like, textbook case of an aligned manifesting generator in terms of, having lots of different varied interests. And I love how you use the word breadcrumbs, because I use that terminology as well when talking about how to kind of navigate life as a manifesting generator, and, look for those little nudges or those things to respond to. And you've touched upon responding a little bit, but I would love to dig in a little bit more to what that actually looks like for you. So maybe we can use the most recent example of these mediumship capabilities that you're feeling. And how did that unfold for you?
So it started when my dad was ill, and we knew that he was terminal with this diagnosis. And so I was interested and thinking a lot about the afterlife, obviously, because of what was happening. And as that was happening for me, I was starting to get things coming into my awareness about mediumship. So somebody would mention a podcast. I'd see a book pop up. I'd see a workshop. I'd bump into someone. I'd meet someone new, and they were a medium, or they'd talk about having just had a reading. It just started showing up in so many ways that I started to explore it. So when things start showing up often, I now know that there's a reason, and I follow those breadcrumbs. So I started reading the books, and I started listening to the podcasts and getting really curious about understanding it for my own situation with my dad. And I then ended up booking a reading that turned out to be 2 weeks before my dad passed, not knowing that timing would wind up being the way it was. And it was deeply impactful for me. And I decided to talk to my parents about it, not knowing what they would say. And my mom said that she couldn't deny that a lot of the things that came from her mother were accurate. And my dad said, like, why would you do this? And I said, because maybe I can still connect with you when you're gone. I don't know. Maybe there's some way that we can stay connected. And he said, well, I can't do that. And being the stubborn German man that he was, I was just laughed. I'm like, well, we'll see. So after he passed, I quickly started receiving signs from him that I knew were from him. And I continued to explore the mediumship world, not thinking that it was something I would be able to do, but thinking more of how can I connect with people that can help me connect to him. And I ended up signing up for a workshop again that just popped in, that someone said, hey, thought you might be into this. And it was a medium out of the UK. And I signed on to the online workshop for a couple of hours, and I was listening. And then they put us into Zoom rooms to practice, which I did not know was happening. And was like happy. They're like, okay, just practice. And I was like, how? I don't know what do you mean? And I ended up bringing through a couple pieces of information. I heard things. That's how it was working. And I thought, oh, wow, maybe this is a thing. And so I did a few of those little workshops. And in the meantime, I was still speaking with the medium that read for me before my dad passed, and asking her some questions and things. And I said I was nervous to practice on any of my friends or family because I was afraid it wouldn't work. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. I didn't want to disappoint anyone. And so she practiced on me. So we booked a time, that was mid-April, and I ended up doing a reading and bringing her grandmother through with lots of validated information. And that opened something up. And for the next month or so, I had the experience of receiving all kinds of connections, not intentionally. I'd be driving and I'd start feeling a connection. And it was somebody I'd just been with, one of their loved ones, trying to come through, because it was like I was this open beacon. And then I started to learn to set boundaries around it and found some teachers and some guidance and some training. And I'm exploring that, not knowing exactly where it's going at the moment, like all of the things that I've pursued, but understanding that there's a reason I'm being nudged, guided, interested in this thing, and understanding more about myself in the process.
So
Yeah.
fascinating. Fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so sorry to hear about your dad. And I think when we first connected, I shared with you that I lost my dad as well. It's been about 10 years now, though, which is crazy to say. But what an amazing way to, still be able to connect. And what a gift. And just such a beautiful story of how you're following those breadcrumbs. And I love the examples that you shared about the different things that come into your awareness, which I think because we are trained to be so logical, we often dismiss those things as mere coincidence, right? And the fact is that there are no coincidences, right? It's like...
I truly believe that we're guided through even the things that people will say to us, things that we will overhear, like a line in a conversation in a coffee shop, books that someone will recommend to us, podcasts that pop up that aren't necessarily the genre we're listening to, but somehow they're popping up. All of those things are breadcrumbs that we're meant to follow in my world. The more that I open up to it, the more it happens. And the more I trust that I'm meant to follow it. Like I'll go to an event sometimes that I have a feeling that I need to go to, but I'm not really sure why. And my husband will say to me, like, what is this? I'm like, well, there's a reason I'm going and I'm going to find out when I get there. And sure enough, there'll either be something I need to hear, or I will meet someone in that event that is connected to something else that's going on. Like it never fails. The more you're open, the more you're aware, the more you're guided. I feel like back to the things that are aligned with your truest self or your purpose or your calling or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And as a 6-2, you've got that 6 line is very experimental through that first phase of life. And then you're probably just about to come off the roof, right? Because you're...
Well, I think I'm deeply in that space.
Deeply in there?
Yeah.
How old? You're 40?
49.
49?
40.
Okay, maybe a few more years, and then you'll be more in the transition of the third phase of a six line life. And on the roof just means that you're integrating all of those experiments. But the vibe of a 6 line is that you are kind of looking into the next realm. The profile lines 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all sort of build up to line 5, but there's this feeling of like being on the 3D plane, 1 through 5, and then 6 is just sort of this different, it's like ready, it's almost like you're living in the new paradigm already, but you're still like walking around amongst the rest of us, so it doesn't surprise me that mediumship is part of your path as well. And one of the other things that's interesting about your chart is that you have an undefined spleen, which is where that intuition comes in. And I think that when you have defined centers, that means it's consistent energy when it comes to us in very consistent ways. And when it's undefined, it just means that you can develop wisdom in that area of your life because it's coming into you in many different ways. And so it's interesting that for you, you hear things, that clairaudience.
Yeah.
And I also wouldn't be surprised if you find yourself able to channel things in different, tap into other clairs, like
Yeah,
clairs.
definitely. Yeah. As I'm opening up, the other clairs are coming online, and looking back to the time I was writing my book, I feel like I was channeling some pieces of that, not knowing what was happening at the time. In the moments I was in a real flow and it was just happening, I now realize that some of that was sort of a channeling experience.
Can you describe what that feels like?
It feels like I'm not trying to write this next section. I'm like, I sit down with the intention of what I'm going to write. And then sometimes when you sit down to write, it feels like pushing. Like, I've got to get this done. I've got to get it out on the paper. And the times that I felt like I was in more of that channeling place, it just seemed to flow. Like the words came. I wasn't in my head about, is this good? Is this going to be right? Is that how someone going to hear this? I was just relaying what was coming through in a very pure way, I guess.
Wow.
And so it was a combination in that writing experience. It's the first book I'd written. I started to understand when I was more in that flowy place, and I try to just stay there. And there were other days I sat down to write. I had a practice of writing every morning from 6 to 7 a.m. That was my contract with myself. And then I would book some other times in my schedule to go to a coffee shop for a different environment. And some of those 6 to 7 a.m. sessions, I would write like one paragraph, and it would feel like I was going through mud. And a lot of times I would stand up and walk away. I'm like, it's just not happening. I'm not there. But there were other mornings that I was in the right energy, had the right intention. I'd sit down and I'd write 5 pages, like felt effortless. And I'd look back and be like, damn, that sounds good. So there's definitely something to tapping into the right energy, alignment, flow.
Yeah. Oh, so good.
When you talk about the 6-2, from what I've understood from having readings and having someone explain my chart to me, is that there's like a role model element to being a 6-2, which I am at this point starting to understand about myself, and am shifting to kind of developing more of a personal brand that encompasses all of these things, where I've had an experience like leaving my corporate job, and then I've shared what that was about. I've had an experience of going alcohol free, and then I've shared what that's about. I've had the experience of understanding the afterlife and the way that things have happened with my dad, and now have plans to try to share some of that. So that I have recently recognized as like a thread that's come through a lot of things. And there's like a vulnerability to every one of those things that I've shared. But I think, I don't know if that's part of it, because it's kind of the way that I shared in my book was vulnerable, but like the way you feel inside making the shift to starting your business. The alcohol-free stuff is not easy to talk about in a lot of contexts. And the spiritual stuff is definitely not easy in some audiences to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah. And the kind of catchphrase for the line 6 is the role model. And I feel like there is this flavor to the 6 line that is sort of otherworldly. And when you're willing to step into that and really accept it and be confident that that's part of your design, then you are doing so much service to the world. And the 2 part of the profile is really about this natural, being a natural at things coming to you. It's sort of the energy of you have a hard time even understanding how people can't do something. Like, what do you mean that that's like blinking? What do you mean you can't X. And
Yeah.
sometimes it can take people reflecting to you, no, actually, not everybody does know how to do that. And could you explain it to me? And two lines are also hermits, and
Mhm.
like to have alone time. And so being called forth to share some of those things can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable because you're being put in a spotlight or, yeah.
To speak to the point you were making about that natural ability, I actually find that that's something I've found challenging sometimes because I think that sometimes some things will feel natural to me. I find it hard to teach that to someone else or there's like wisdom that I'm like, I don't know how I know that. There's like an intuitive nature
Right.
that makes it difficult to be like, oh, here's the step by step of how I did that.
Right.
And that's, that's been, again, a good learning for me from understanding my human design.
Mhm.
And that sometimes I can get in my head about why can't I just, teach someone how to do that, or I should be able to. But I've also come to realize that that's a strength, having that intuitive wisdom that I can't really explain how it's there or why I know that or how I know to do that. I just kind of know.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. 100%. And your ability to explain your intuitive nature is wonderful. You can use that to help root you
Mhm.
in what you're sharing, because other people who have those intuitive abilities, but don't trust them the way that you do, can use your example and learn from it. And when they hear you talking about how do you tap into your intuition? How do you know when to trust it? How do
Mhm.
you even know when it's talking to you? Your,
Right.
your ability to put words to that is really helpful, and just in doing so, you are teaching people. So I'm curious, you've got the undefined head as well, which allows those channeling kinds of things to come in pretty easily for you. And I'm curious with those two undefined centers, the spleen and the head, how have you kind of developed your trust in your intuition?
I think it's by following those little breadcrumbs and seeing that they lead to places that they're meant to. And that starts to develop the muscle to trust that when I'm feeling like a pull to talk to someone or feeling a pull not to go to something or feeling a pull to read a book, that there is something there for me. And I think it comes through experience of just doing it. And then the more you do it, the more it becomes natural. And then you're like, well, I'm doing a wacky thing, but there's a reason. Um, yeah. And
Love
it's
it.
just like, it becomes a bit of a magical way to live in some cool ways because it just feels like there's really cool experiences sometimes if you open yourself up to these things.
Yeah.
And the other thing I should share is I've had a meditation practice for probably 5 years. And I've off and on tried to meditate for years, but I really kind of got in the practice of doing that. And that stillness and having regular stillness in your life, whether you call it a meditation practice where you're sitting or you're regularly walking in nature or sitting with a cup of coffee for 3 minutes and not letting anything else be the focus, those moments of stillness, I think, help you discern and hear those internal thoughts or those feelings that might not make sense at the time, but become clearer when you listen. So, as an example, I think you're being guided and set up all the time when you listen. In December of 2022, I had released my book in the fall. I had intended to create more programs to support new entrepreneurs starting in January. And I kind of did a lot of launch activities in the fall for the book. And then I took some downtime at Christmas. And my plan was to come back in January and focus more of my time and attention on developing that new direction. And as a result of that, I made the very difficult decision to end a contract with my longest term client and to start transitioning out of a role that I'd had with them. And I loved them so much, and I loved so much about that, but I understood that I needed to focus my attention and make some shifts. And so in December, I had those conversations with them. I had no idea that my dad was going to get sick the next month.
Mm.
We knew he was ill, but we didn't know that that diagnosis was coming. And I had literally opened up space in my life for what I thought was going to be this new business direction, but allowed me to be there for him. I just listened to the feeling that I knew that something had to shift. I felt it.
Yeah.
It was the most difficult things I've ever done, but then led me to a place where I was supposed to be, to have more time to be with him at that time. So it's listening when it doesn't make sense all the time, or it feels hard, or it feels scary. Yeah.
Wow. I just got full body chills. I'm so impacted by your bravery, first of all, because it does take so much bravery and will, I think, to be willing to follow those nudges and those knowings, especially if oftentimes we feel like we have to explain ourselves or we have to justify.
Yes.
Right? And most people won't accept the the idea of like, my intuition is telling me that this is what I need to do, right?
Yes.
They're looking for more logical kinds of things. And all of these pieces are part of the new paradigm that we're moving into, right? It is more rooted in intuition and trusting ourselves. And I loved your answer. It's such a perfect 6-line answer in terms of just experimenting and building the evidence for yourself as a way to help build that trust muscle.
And I want to share that I have spent most of my life being a very logical, analytical person. And that's actually one of my strengths in the work that I've done with clients. So starting to develop this intuitive side felt so foreign to me because I am so logical and so analytical that I wanted to figure out with my mind a lot of the answers to these things and now understand I don't think you can live in either, that it becomes your ability to dance between your intellect and your intuition, I think is the muscle to develop that really helps you move forward. And so when I'm looking at a decision, I don't try to just think through with my mind. I will go through the logic of it, and then I'll try to get still in my body. And how does it feel when I think about that decision in my body? And I know now that when I have a no, I feel it in my lower belly, in my gut. And when I have a yes, I feel it in my heart. So I will get really still and ask that question. How does it feel, this decision? How does it feel? And sometimes it surprises me.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I've thought, there's no way I'm going to do that thing. It doesn't make any sense. And it goes to my heart, and it goes to my heart. And I take a lot of weight of that. And other things where I'm like, this makes logical sense. And I really want this thing, but it's going to my gut.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that description, because one of the questions I was going to ask you was about your sacral as a generator type, right? You've got that defined sacral. And what you're describing is that upward and downward movement. It's that lifting, that expansiveness that you get from your sacral versus the drop or the, I always hear kathunk in my, my head, you know, when I'm thinking about the sacral no. However, you have an emotional authority.
Okay.
Is to say that it's just about giving yourself time. So if you're, in the moment and you're really excited about something and you feel the lift, just allowing for more of those breadcrumbs to come in, right? And help to solidify that yes, or take you in a different direction.
Definitely.
Yeah. Have you, can you share any experiences where you've had a decision to make when you've tapped into that emotional authority and used that timing to help you?
Yeah, I have a really good example of this. The fall before my dad got ill, I had been trying to manifest a new Audi car. And I had done a lot of work around my self-image and like a lot of the mindset work. And I had moved into the place where I was ready to like commit to this car. And I finally placed the order. And then I found out it was this massive delay and they couldn't get this feature I wanted and it was not going to happen.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I was disappointed. So a couple months later, I was like, nope, I'm still focused on I'm manifesting the outer. I get a call out of the blue from the dealer. We don't understand this, but this car came in, the exact car you wanted with the feature you wanted. Da, 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 da. It wasn't supposed to be, it's not even in the books. It's just showed up. It's yours if you want it before it goes in the books. I was like, wow, amazing. This is my story of manifesting my Audi. So I went to the dealer, went through all the paperwork, brought my old car to trade in, was like ready to drive off the lot. And the guy's showing me in the inside of the car. And I said, okay, how do you work the adaptive cruise control? And he said, well, this car doesn't have that. I'm like, but I ordered that. And that's an important feature for me. I drive long distances and I really want that. And he's like, no, you didn't order that. I'm like, I am sure I did. So we went back to the paperwork and we found out that it was a mistake at the manufacturing plant. They didn't put part of the package on the car they were supposed to. So once again, I was like, I got so close. I literally was in the car ready to drive off the lot. And it was not going to happen. So they gave me the option to drive that car for 3 months. And they were going to order me the other one with all the features that I wanted on it. And they made it attractive and it was all good. And it seemed like it was good. And I came home and a couple of days later, I was supposed to go back to pick up the car. And I woke up in the morning and I was sick in my stomach. Like my stomach was in such a knot. I'm like, I can't afford this. Like, it's not right. I don't know if it's because I'm nervous of damaging the car while I have it, while I wait for the other car. It was such a strong no that I was like literally sick. And I ended up going back to the dealer and said, I don't want to drive the other car. I don't want the Audi. I don't know why, but it's just not right. Like something is not right about doing this. So I canceled the order. Mm-hmm. And I was so upset at the time because it was, I thought I'm manifesting this car and it's finally here and all the things. What I now know is that I would have had a car payment that I would have been on the hook for, that when my dad got ill, I wouldn't have been able to, that would have been a huge stress for me. Mm-hmm. Now believe that car didn't happen to give me some more breathing room financially to be able to step back from some of my work. And it was such a strong example to me of not making sense, but it was such a clear no, screaming no, do not do this deal. And I think it was setting me up for a little bit more financial breathing room, given what was coming next that I had no idea of.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right? That's a great example. Like incredible. And I think I also just want to point out that you're noticing the connection. I think so many people, if they wake up in the morning and they have a stomach ache, it's just like, oh, what did I eat? Yeah. Or, like what, there must be a flu going around, or just this like exterior kind of, it's happening to me versus our bodies being a vehicle that help to give us information if we're willing to listen to it, right?
Yes. And it's more subtle at first. And then if you're not listening, it goes hard. We had another example, and I recognize the feeling because of a previous example where my husband and I had been looking at buying a boat, and we flew to Chicago to look at this boat. We took it out. It looked beautiful. The interior was all decorated, gorgeous. It was beautiful. And we put an offer in on it, and I had that feeling right away, sick, 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 sick. And I thought it was because of the financial investment we were about to make. And I'm like, it's so much money. Is this the right decision? Are we going to do this? So in my logical mind, I was logically, that's a word, that it because of the money. But my husband then went back with a surveyor to do, they survey, it's like a home inspection on a boat. And they found out that the boat was full of mechanical problems. And we were offer. And I knew that feeling was telling me it was a no. It wasn't about the money. It was a no because there was something else going on. So when I got that exact same feeling on the morning of the Audi, I knew it, that there was something else going on. And I just needed to listen, even though it didn't make sense because they were offering me this sweet deal to take the other car for a few months. But it was that lesson from the boat that I was like, oh, this is the same thing happening. I don't know why. It's going to make sense one day, and trusting that to be true.
You have so many great examples, and it's commendable how much you're tuning in to what your body says, and even more commendable that you're listening to it. Because like you said, you were very logical. You were steeped in logic, right? Working in a corporate career for years and years. And the world in which we live right now favors logic. Things have to make sense. It's that masculine energy of linear thinking versus the feminine sort of more flow state, and being willing to open up to things you can't necessarily perceive with your five senses, or that you can't explain.
And the more I'm learning about living this way, the more I understand it is our natural state. It's not that a lot of people think listening to your intuition might be woo-woo, or, all of these things like looking for signs and understanding internal nudges and all of those things. It is naturally how we operate, but we get so busy trying to use our minds and busy in our lives that we don't leave space for quiet to connect into that knowing. But when you start, it's like a muscle. When you start opening up to it and you start practicing a little bit, it becomes more natural, and it literally is our natural state. We have five senses, our psychic senses, if you will, like our clairaudience and our clairvoyance, and all of those things are naturally available to all of us, but we just are not taught to develop them or to use them as a part of our decision-making process.
So true. I want to circle back to the midlife through line, and this being a transitional time and transformational time for women. So when you left your career, when was that you left corporate? Like
11 years ago? 11 years ago.
So you were in mid-30s at that point?
Yeah.
Shifted to entrepreneurship. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about your decision to do that and moving into it. I know you probably captured all of this in your book, which you can definitely share. I would just like to hear for listeners if they are looking, because oftentimes women around this time are considering, should I leave my career that I've built for 2 decades?
Right.
Is it all these things? So I'd love to hear your story there.
Yeah. So for me at that time, I was commuting from Oakville to downtown Toronto. I had 2 young children at that time, and I was in a manager role, and I was being prepared to take on a director role. And as a part of that, I was given access to a business coach, which ironically, through a lot of the work that we did together, it was supposed to be about developing my leadership style. I realized I was not aligned and did not want that next step for my career. It would have meant more time in the office, more face time. It would have meant running a larger team. And I didn't love the idea of doing that. I feel like my energy is better spent when I'm focused on a project and I'm really bringing that to life, or reaching or achieving a goal, and with other people in different ways. But I didn't feel like it was most aligned for me to be moving into that space. And at the same time, I was doing marketing for an accounting firm, and we were focused on private companies. That's who we're marketing to. And I was having a lot of discussions with CEOs at the events, and they would find out that I was in the marketing group. And they'd say, oh, we've got like a marketing person, or we've kind of got this person that sort of does marketing. That's also our engineer, but sort of does it. And I was starting to recognize that there was maybe a need for somebody to look at the big picture strategy and planning with some understanding and knowledge of marketing to help some of these businesses. And I had been thinking about that, and it had been building in me that I wasn't happy. I was completely like burnt out from the commuting back and forth. My kids were in 2 different daycares. Like when I look back at that time, I have no idea how I did it. And just feeling this pressure, that I could be doing something that was going to have more impact. And the straw that broke the camel's back was one day I was in a meeting with my boss and his boss, and we were talking about getting some more funding to do some research. And I was really excited because I thought we were going to use that funding to do some more customer research, and we were going to get some better insights to be able to do some better marketing. And the decision was made to use those funds to do an internal survey of the partners to see how the marketing department was doing. And I just was really frustrated because I just didn't think that that was the best use of it. And I just wanted to be able to do my job better and have more access to research. And so I left that meeting and I was really frustrated. My boss could see that. And he said, let's go for coffee. And I can see you're upset. So we went for coffee, and he said, like, why are you so bothered by that? I said, because like we could use the money for this and that. And he said, why are you letting it like caring so much? Just like do your job and, go home to your family and don't worry about it. And in that moment, I felt like I want to be spending my time, that I am leaving my kids. I am going through all these hoops to get to this job. I'm making all these sacrifices. I want to be doing something that I feel is making an impact and matters. And I went home that night and cried the whole night and talked to my husband. And we had been having these discussions. And I said, I feel like maybe it's time for me to try just doing my own thing as a consulting business. But I was terrified because I had no idea how to do that and no idea how I'd make money and all of the things. And he said to me, well, this is obviously not working for you. And so you try it. And if it doesn't work out, you're employable, you get another job. And if you don't do this, you're going to just continue to be in this space and never know what could have been. So I made the decision to leave, and not knowing exactly what I was going to be developing or creating. And I spent a few weeks kind of going to yoga and decompressing and going for walks and trying to, just feel like I was filling myself back up energetically. And I got a call from someone who was a partner at that law firm I was at, or the accounting firm, and said, I have this company. They need help with marketing. I think you'd be great. And I said, I'm not a company. Like, I'm not a thing. And just talk to the CEO. Just go see him. So I had lunch with him. And that turned out to be the start of a beautiful relationship for many years. They became my first client, a company in Hamilton. What did I know about that? Which turned out to be much more than I thought. And that became the start of what became my business. And then through referrals and networking and just reaching out to different people, I built a business over many years.
So good. I love that. It's funny how you described the meeting, and just knowing it very much mirrors my own exit from teaching, with being disillusioned about decisions that were being made. And you mentioned being terrified, which is one of the pieces that I've been trying to address to support midlife women, because when you've built something for your entire life, or especially if you've been in this career for years and years, and you're just not happy, but it's terrifying to take that step. I'm curious, how did you feel the fear and do it anyway?
I feel like it just got to this point where I couldn't not make the decision. And I was again, now that I look back on it, I didn't know it at that time, like physically starting to feel ill, like a lot of stomach problems. Now that I made that connection, I'd never really made that connection until now. And I just, every morning going in, it was just, I felt sick, I felt sick, I felt sick. And it just got to the point where it's almost like I couldn't not do it. So the fear of me continuing to live the way I was feeling versus the fear of the unknown, I guess, just started to shift. Yeah.
Ooh, I'm picturing like the scales, right? Just slightly tipping. That's beautiful. And thanks for making the connection with the not feeling well either.
And I was also fortunate to say that I'm married. I had a husband that we could financially shoulder me making a transition. And not everyone is as fortunate or privileged as that. So I just want to make that clear too, that I understand that making that decision is different for people in different situations and does take a lot more planning consideration. There's a different level of things at stake sometimes. So I just want to be clear about that as well.
Yeah, for sure. There's a privilege to having some of that flexibility. And I have owned that as well, having that experience myself. I'm curious also. So you're from leaving your career to moving into entrepreneurship, and then from marketing to the alcohol-free lifestyle. A lot of women in midlife find that alcohol is this evil that exacerbates the perimenopause symptoms. For example, waking up at night with sweats. So I'm just curious about your shift there. And for you, was it related at all to perimenopause symptoms?
Yeah, very related to perimenopause. So I was 45 when I stopped drinking. And for the probably a couple years before that, I was starting to feel like alcohol wasn't maybe aligning. And I was starting to experience some symptoms of perimenopause. And I was rationalizing them away. And not wanting to admit that I think it could have been the wine that I was drinking on a regular basis. So I was a social drinker and we have an active social life. And instead of doing something about the wine, I started doing all the other things. I intuitively knew that it was not agreeing with me anymore. But I started going to a naturopath and taking different supplements and doing different things, all the things to avoid doing the thing that I intuitively knew was probably the problem. And so it's been 4 years now. So that summer, we went on a 3-week boat trip because we were just coming out of all the COVID lockdowns a bit. We were having a bit more openness. So we went with 3 other boats and we did a 3-week epic trip to the north part of Ontario. It was unbelievable and beautiful and we loved it. And I drank every day because we were on vacation and we were, I wasn't drunk. I was having like a Caesar in the morning and a cooler in the afternoon, and there's some wine with dinner. So you were kind of steadily drinking for 3 weeks. And by the end of that, I felt horrible. I wasn't sleeping. I had heartburn all the time. I was popping Tums and antacids like they were nothing. And I was feeling anxious and kind of just inflamed. And I got to the point where I was like, this has to change. And have to see if cutting out alcohol will make a difference. And I had done dry Januaries in the past and been miserable throughout them because it was like from a place of being deprived. And I thought, okay, this time I'm going to apply a lot of the mindset work that I've been doing over the last few years and approach it from a different perspective as an experiment and just see if I quit for a while, not a 30-day commitment, nothing like that, what happens. And it was such a dramatic change for me that I just kept continuing and continuing and continuing. And within the first week, my heartburn was gone. My sleep, I didn't realize was as bad as it was, drastically improved. Energy was better. I just felt clear. There was so many benefits that I sort of just kept going and going and going until the point where it's now 4 years. It was 4 years in August.
Wow. And I love you use the word experiment as a 6 line so 6 lines are 3 lines for the beginning of their lives up until it sort of flips and they're called forward to share their
Okay.
experiences. And so you spend the first part of your life as a 3-line, and there's always this inherent experimental nature to 3 lines and 6 lines. So I love that because you're, like you said, not depriving yourself, but looking at it like an experiment. And when you experiment with something, it gives you a certain amount of freedom to just sort of curious and discover versus feeling boxed in, which I think is also a really beautiful way to approach things for a 6-line.
And that's the way that I frame it in the program I've created. So I took the experience I had and people were starting to ask me about going alcohol free. They're mostly asking me for non-alcoholic drink recommendations. And I'm always happy to share that. But I was thinking, oh, there's so much more. Like there's a lot of shifts you need to make, not just changing what's in your glass. There's a lot to it. So I started thinking about all the things that I had learned and the experiences I'd had. And again, starting to think of how do I share this? So I created a 6-week program called Still Me, but Alcohol Free. And it is a combination of helping you understand the science around what alcohol is really doing to your body, which I had no idea of, the mindset shifts you need to make and giving you the tools to be able to do that. And then practices for how to deal with anxiety and stress in your life and things like meditation and yoga, and bringing other experts in to be able to help you understand how to live in that happily alcohol free and manage your social life and how to talk to people about it, and all of the things that I've brought together to bring people through a supported experiment together where they have the option to either just go through in a self-guided study, or they have an option a few times a year. I run it as a group program so that there's more sharing amongst people that are going through it, who want more accountability and more community. And it's just been beautiful to see how people are having these experiences where a lot of the perimenopause symptoms that they thought were perimenopause symptoms have improved a lot when they take the alcohol out. Things from joint pain to sleep to anxiety, all of it being impacted by alcohol. And it's something that, as you said, it's been a part of our life for so long. Like I say, it's like a friend of me. Like it's been your friend through so many great experiences. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this is a toxic relationship and it's not feeling as good as it used to, but you don't know how to sort of make that shift.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned that you run it a few times a year with a support, right?
January, I think mid-January, I'll start it. So that means it's a 6-week program. We spend the first 2 weeks learning, and then we do a 4-week experience together. So starting mid-January sort of sets you up in January, and then we're alcohol-free through dry February.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll drop that link in the show notes so people can check that out. And can you tell us where to find you?
Yeah. So Instagram's probably the best place to find me, Laura_Valvasori. Yeah. So I'm just sort of in this point of bringing together a lot of the things we've talked about and rebranding myself and continuing to explore and practice on the mediumship side and stay open to where I'm being led next.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can't wait to find out where that might be. It's been such a pleasure talking with you today. Thank you so much, Laura, for being here and for sharing your wisdom and everything that you've learned over your lifetime and the various Manny-Gen things that you have going on. So I will drop your link in the show notes, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this, because I think it's really important for people to understand human design, especially at this midlife point when people are going through a lot of transitions. I think it can be really, really supportive to understand yourself in this way to be able to make decisions. So thank you for all that you're sharing with the world as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for listening to Midlife by Design. I hope this episode gave you some things to think about in regards to navigating midlife and perimenopause. If you're struggling, book a call with me. Let's talk about how human design can make a difference in how you live this phase of your life. It could very well be the permission you need and the clarity you're seeking that will lead you to making midlife the best part of your life. And remember, the Wild Women by Design retreat experience kicks off in January. We head to Costa Rica in March, but our community building and online learning starts in January, and we have some spots left. So check the link in the show notes and give yourself the gift of coming back to you for the holidays. As we close, I'm sending you the strength to release what no longer serves you, joy to fill your days, and the clarity to be who you came here to be.